Hello and welcome to the second part of my Welsh AAR thing. If you missed the first video, then there will be a link in the description, but to remind those of you who maybe have forgotten, a little summary. We started as Wales, 8 locations, 0 towns, 10 vassals. After integrating the vassals and building a few towns, we had a rebellion fire led by Owain Glyndŵr. After having to use the console to have Owen win, and also to flip my culture to Welsh, as I believe Owen winning should accomplish, we stayed as vassals of the English crown for a few more decades, biding our time and building up our state. On the 11th of November 1444, we declared our independence, backed up by a massive coalition of France, Castile, Scotland and Sweden, and in the ensuing peace deal I took over all of Wales and conquered the English provinces of Gloucestershire, Somerset, Devon and Cornwall, bringing our total population to 1 million. We all caught up? Perfect. I'll remind you how this kind of thing will go. I have a Photoshop open here with parts of the game. This is obviously not in-game footage. This image was taken from the very recent England flavor dev diary, and I have used Photoshop nonsensory to change the colors. It's literally just using the saturation and hue changer. So I have not got in-game footage. I'm not allowed to show you in-game footage or images. This is just Photoshop on images from the dev diaries. And I have a few images that I'll flip to as we go further through our little bit of story. But again, unfortunately, I can't show you anything that actually happened in-game from the game because I'm just not allowed yet. Hopefully, at some point soon, we'll be able to show actual footage. At various points, I might pause what I'm reading because I am reading basically from a script that I wrote while playing the game. Because, again, I have various diagnosed and undiagnosed problems that give me problems with my memory. So I've been writing this script as I play through the game, and then this is basically what we're going to read. So, hope you guys enjoy it. Hope you guys get a little bit of information from this. And yeah, just have a good time. And let's go. So, we will take a look at our new lands. Surprisingly, I'd only gained a single town, Bristol, with every other location remaining rural. Bristol, though, was 37,000 pop and had a thriving industry, though, of course, I could not tap into it until the control came up. Thankfully, the proximity was at 61%, and our control would eventually equilibrize to 37%. Not stellar, but not terrible. Goods-wise, the only new goods I'd acquired were tin in Cornwall, fibre crops in Bristol, and some salt and fruit as well. The natural harbour suitability of Truro in Cornwall and Plymouth were excellent, so I made a note to make both of those into towns when I could afford it. And just to point out, right down here is Truro, and there we go. Right down here is Truro, and this one here is Plymouth. While checking the location rank map mode, I noticed Chester, the English vassal to my north that owned Welsh territory, was fully towned up. They owned 4 locations in total, and every single one of them was urbanized. That would be a very key acquisition if England were to ever lose it. To save myself having to core all of the territory, a few vassals were released. Wessex was released out of Somerset, and you can see where that is on the map. And no, I actually have no idea why it chose that name. And Worcestershire was, well, out of Worcestershire. This was probably the most disappointing province in the game, as it consists of just 2 locations, which is not very good at all. There are places in India with over a dozen, and here we are with just Kidderminster and Worcestershire making up a single province. It's kind of ridiculous, in my opinion. I decided to keep Cornwall and Devon as I wanted to urbanize those locations more than anything. Obviously, Cornwall is this one here. Truro was made into a town quickly, as I had a huge surplus of wood, masonry and glass, so the price for township was just 255 ducats. Plymouth took a little bit longer as the glass became more expensive, but still just 270 ducats later I had yet another town. Wharfs and docks were built in both, and I decided it was time to build a proper navy. The 2 barks I had were sunk during the war with England, and I wanted at least 16 ships. It would allow me to properly increase my maritime presence across my coastline and make some actual value out of my conquests. Initially, I just placed them all in the Severn, which is this sea tile here. The sea tile that split Wales from Cornwall. And it was rising by 0.37 a month, which was pretty decent. Once it got to around about 80, I put the Navy on patrol the seas, which would automatically split the Navy to manage the task of maritime presence for me. Realizing how long it was going to take me to integrate my new land, I also released Devon, which included the future town of Plymouth. I would get it later. Early in the game, integrating via subjects is much faster and more cost effective. This did lead me to going over my diplomatic limit, and I was spending nearly 9 ducats a month on diplomatic spending, but I felt it was probably a worthy price. Because due to my, English subsidies that I took, which was 21 ducats a month, the economy was booming. I used the money to give my heir, Owain, an expensive education worth 250 ducats. Well, let's just hope he doesn't die. I also built up the roads in my nation. A road from Penfro to my old capital of Carnarvon was completed, so going all the way over here. As well as one to Bristol and to the middle of Wales in Radnor. So, Radnor going up there, and then I think I had a road that went all the way over here towards Bristol. This would help propagate the control and give me a little bit more value out of my lands. The free ride didn't last forever though, and in January 1454 the war reps ended and our truce ran out, and then England immediately jumped into another coalition against me. I made them my rival and raised my fort maintenance to 50% just in case they attacked. It was at this point, when looking through my laws for which I might want to change via Parliament, that I realised that my court language was still English, with 10% language power. I could switch it to Brythonic, which was a Welsh dialect which had 0.04% power, or to Latin, which had 100% power. Even with the tooltip there, I couldn't really tell what this actually gave me in benefit, as no other country used Latin. Whereas with the English language, it gave me a trade advantage in Dublin and the London markets. So I saved the game and swapped for 20 stability just for a test, and it didn't make any difference. I was hoping this would be the thing that let me see the formable of Prydain, or change my name from Wales to Cymru, or change my flag, but alas, none of these happened, so I reloaded. After building up my relations with France for a while, I was able to upgrade my defensive pact to an alliance, though that came with a problem of now being quite heavily over my allowed diplomatic capacity, 7.71 out of 3.2. This made Wessex and Worcestershire disloyal, so to free up 2 capacity, I left the defensive league, and then supported loyalists in all 3 vassals and managed to somewhat solve the situation, if only temporarily. In 1457, I started annexing Wessex. This was the vassal that was most likely to have the best proximity to my capital, and annexing would let me instantly have the cores. Since the war ended, the only cores I'd managed to create were in provinces where I already owned territory, like England's exclave in Deheubarth. Vassal play, if you can stomach the capacity, is much faster than coring naturally. It would, however, take 200 months to integrate just 5 rural locations, due to Welsh being a much weaker culture than English. Though with the frequency at which they became disloyal again, this went far beyond 200 months. I will, pause my reading as well to point out that coring definitely is slower than vassal feeding and vassal integrating, especially when your culture is very powerful. But also, it doesn't take a cabinet slot, right? I have a very limited amount of cabinet members. I'm doing things that are very useful with them, like increasing control in various provinces, or trying to culture convert, raising stability, raising legitimacy, all these very important tasks. And if I can not use one of those tasks to core and instead, get those cores for free via integrating, that's a really big benefit of it. But if you take too much and you have too many vassals, it's very difficult to actually get these guys integrated in any decent amount of time. So there is a balance that you really need to strike there. In 1461, France called me into the 100 Years' War, and we were back at war with England. At this time, my army stood at a meagre 7,000 levies and 300 regulars, with my disloyal vassals adding around 2,000 levies each. Brittany soon arrived with 15,000 on my coast, and I had my army siege the unfortified south of England. Before I could finish the siege of even just Salisbury, which is, I believe, around about here-ish, England rocked up with 2,000 regulars, and the battle commenced. EU5 has the predictor system from CK3, and if I recall correctly, Imperator as well, and it showed me that I was very likely to lose the battle. We had 2 green arrows for our commander being better, 206 total stats, whereas the enemy just had 94 total stats. It also told me that I had a stronger army, with another 3 green arrows. We also had higher morale, another green arrow, and the terrain was to my benefit, as we were in a wooded flatland, another green arrow. The enemy had just one thing going for it: 3 red arrows, as their army had more quality than mine. Those of you who are better at maths than me will notice that there are more green arrows that I just told you about than red arrows, and even so, the game told me that I was likely to lose. I am very heavily in favor of the whole system of predicting battle results being scrapped. I really have never liked this predictive tool. I made sure my army was balanced, and I let it play out. First thing that happened was 6 cannons appeared on the English front, firing at my army without response, as I had no cannons of my own. However, I don't believe early artillery do anything, though, so I wasn't too worried. Like, the enemy had hoofnesses, which is, like, the earliest type of cannon, and when I was doing my my EU5 short about battles, I did a bunch of testing, and so I could get some footage of cannons firing at the enemy, and the enemy, you know, being hurt morale-wise. And with hoofnesses, it just never happened. They're not good enough. They do not do damage in combat. They are purely siege tools, as far as I can tell. When you get up to falconets as the next tier, and then further on, obviously, they do actually do some damage to troops, but hoofnesses, I do not believe actually do. Yeah. I didn't notice any casualties or morale losses on my forces because of that. Other than the 10 levy horsemen of mine who immediately got destroyed, the English were the ones taking up the high initiative fighting, with 4 regiments on their centre and left fighting against just a single regiment of mine on both. My own left flank was exceptionally slow at coming to the front, and my centre and right were basically filled up before a single man joined from the left. Eventually my left dripped fed onto the field and was struck down by the enemy, though my right was doing the same to the English. Casualty-wise, we were both losing between 60 and 120 per tick, and it was relatively even until my left and their left both collapsed at the same tick. Both were now collapsing on the centre, but mine had more troops, and the English centre fled the field. The enemy's right held out for a while, but my victory was inevitable at that point, and we took the day. The enemy entered the field with 2,100 men, and we with 7,100. The enemy lost 2,100 men, and we lost 1,900. Essentially, we stack-wiped them, which is absolutely unfathomably based, glorious, the colossal Welsh W. Another English army appeared on the horizon before I'd complete the siege of Salisbury, but somehow we managed to break them before any of their units had managed to get onto the front line, and they retreated without any casualties. Their retreat path, though, led them straight onto my Devon vassal army, and they began a siege of Exeter. I had my army go to back up my disloyal subject, but it was too late. This is how I learned that even having selected a battle, if you're not part of it, you don't get to see the final battle statistics screen. So, of course, I reported that because I very much like spectating other people's battles that I'm not a part of. Especially in multiplayer, it is a really, really big thing. Anyway, my army rushed in to relieve the siege, and yet again we won, though the casualties were very Pyrrhic. I lost 2,500 to their 2,100. After closing the battle statistics window, though, my heart sank as a 20k stack of English levies appeared over the horizon, and I fled to the north, though we could not evade them forever, and we had a battle in Marblehead, which was exactly where my vassal had their army. Even so, 20,000 versus 6,000 was never going to go our way, so after 5 hours of battle, I ordered the retreat, and the Welsh fled to the valleys. My army of 7,000 was now down to just 2,600 men. I couldn't win unless more troops from France arrived in Britain. Meanwhile, Brittany, to the north, was sieging a bit of Chester, so I marched my army up there to support when a 20k stack of Englishmen came barreling down. We beat them, barely, and suffered many casualties, with my own army now consisting only of 970 men, and the Bretons down to 6k from their initial 15. France was winning, though, and I was hopeful that this war would end soon enough. And then it happened. I marched my army close to the English border, and all of a sudden I was wiped. The English had hidden a 12k stack in a hilly forest, meaning that I could not see into it, even though I bordered the province, and they ambushed me. My 950 remaining men, including 4 units of regulars, was slaughtered to a man. Very unhappy with that. Looking over at France, I saw 2 armies of 6,000, an army of 15,000, and an army of 27,000, all on our side, mind you, facing off against 3,000 Englishmen. If only half of that managed to cross the channel, this war would be in the bag. They were almost through sieging Amiens, though, and as soon as that failed, there would be no unsieged English territory on the continent. At that point, it would be peace or reinforcement, surely. But just then I noticed something strange. In the middle of France, a lonely Welsh unit of man-at-arms. The English, when they had stack-wiped me, transported their prisoners of war all the way to France, and then when France destroyed their captors in battle, they'd set my men free. It didn't make up for the other men-at-arms units that were lost, but it was a nice start. That's probably saved me about 80 ducats in reinforcement costs, or to rebuild them. So I really, again, this is me going off script again, I really think it's very nice that you can take prisoners in battle, and then if you lose those, the prisoners get returned to their original army. Of course, it is possible to just, execute all of your prisoners. You can also make them mercenaries, you can pay them to join your side, or you can have the enemy pay you, honestly, pennies, and I've never done it because it's like 0.5 ducats to give you back 2,000 dudes. It's not worth it. But you can, ransom them back to your enemy. You also lose a little bit of antagonism that way. So it's nice. It's nice. Instead of doing what was eminently possible in invading me, England was dead set on the 100 Years' War and tried multiple times to land an army in France, each time being beaten back and then eventually stack-wiped. I have to say, I did appreciate the lack of any super visible anti-player bias, though the AI could be a little bit smarter about its naval landings. With that, England went over 18 war exhaustion, and when that happens, you unconditionally surrender at 100%. And with that, France drove England out of France, winning the 100 Years' War in 1465. One thing this war ending reminded me is that this game does not have an end peace screen. Sure, we have the war terms, and in this war I was very pleased to see them release Chester and Lancaster from England, and I was also excited to assimilate them into my burgeoning country. But there was no screen at the end of the war to tell me that England lost X amount and France lost Y, and that's a shame, and I hope it's added very soon. For what it's worth, I did check shortly before the war's end, and England had lost around 70,000 men, the French coalition around 58,000. Boat-wise, the English had lost around 24 and the French around 70, though I assume most of those were levied ships. Now, war over, back to dealing with my vassals. I spent 20 of my 41 stability swapping out my plutocratic ethos government reform for diplomatic traditions, increasing my diplo rep by 3 and my diplo capacity by 1. Of course, these reforms don't apply instantly and instead grow over time, so I had to wait over 2 years before I could see the full result, and it was interesting. While I was at around 70% completed, I noticed that my fiefdom of Devon was worth 2.56 diplo capacity, whereas my other vassals were 0.81 and 0.71 respectively. To put that into contrast, my alliance with France was only worth 2.64, which was just 0.08 more diplo capacity than Devon. It felt very, very strange, and I couldn't really figure out why. Devon had 154,000 pops, sure, but Wessex had 153,000. Hovering over the capacity, it turned out that they were so expensive because of relative power. But relative power is calculated together with all similar vassal types, and Wessex was also a fiefdom. I really couldn't work it out, and so I decided to start spending some gold on building up a professional army, to see if that could work it out. But as soon as a man-at-arms marched out of my armory, Devon jumped to 2.64, equal with France. Honestly, ridiculous. When diplomatic traditions was finished, I changed out mining communities for fixed vassal obligation, which would give my subjects 15 extra loyalty. It ended up being enough, and by 1468, my integration was back on track. The next parliament that came up, I chose a noble issue, as they would get me the most starting support, so I could then ask them to prepare for war. I had been waiting for this since before the France War too, and had been planning to invade Ireland, though now I had 2 very juicy targets on my northern border. But as soon as I went to check, Chester had already vassalized Lancaster, and also allied with England. And then soon after that, they became a dominion of England, all before any truce had run out. And that kinda stinks. I think if you have a truce through a war that forced your independence, you should at the very least have to wait until that truce is up before you go sucking back up to your former overlord again. But at the time I realised this, my parliament had ended, and I didn't even get my Ireland deck off either. In 1365, Llewellyn died, and the 25-year-old Owain II took the throne. At 49, 61, 60, on his stats, I was quite impressed with him, and I had him marry into the Wittelsbach dynasty through a royal marriage with Denmark. I also unlocked the advance that gave me access to a new cabinet laws, and I chose to go with dynastic administration, which reduced all of my estate's power by 10%, but also reduced my admin efficiency by 10% as well. Don't be dismayed though, admin efficiency is nothing like its namesake in EU4, and it just speeds up the implementation of new laws, policies, and privileges, and I can do without that. It brought my crown power to 36%, which among other great bonuses, increased my trade income by the same amount. My next Parliament debate, I was ready, and I chose Promote Castleworks to get the highest amount of support, and then made a claim against Connaught. And we can do this, Connaught being, obviously, this green guy at the top. They were on the opposite side of Ireland to me, but they also had alliances in both Kildare, Tyrone, and Clanricarde, and if I annexed all of them, I would be in a great position on the island to contest the English-held lands of the Pale. My claim was for the province of Roscommon, which is, like, around here-ish. As it had the highest population, and fun fact, it is where I used to live when I lived in Ireland. With that sorted, I declared the war. The Parliament CB has gone through a few changes, and currently it gives 10% antagonism and war score cost, as well as a base 10% stability hit, though this was reduced by 45% due to my power projection over the Irish. I first landed my 400 regulars in Fiarna, to the south of Dublin in Kildare's territory, while my 9,000 levies were still raising, and due to a lack of available characters I had my king himself lead the way. Owain II would make landfall in Ireland soon after, backed up by the levy. Our navy was much larger, but worryingly the Irish had built 3 early carracks, heavy ships, and I definitely did not want to engage them. So after my army was transported, I kept the fleet docked to prevent issues. 2 of Kildare's forts were left abandoned, so we broke down the front gates and seized them for ourselves before Tyrone marched south to engage half of our forces. It didn't go well for them. For the cost of 400 Welshmen, 2,000 Irishmen died as the remainder fled the field. All in all, we had 6 battles in Kildare before we managed to fully occupy them, losing 1.3k of our own to 8k of theirs, and separate piece them out for full annexation. The next target was Clanricarde, who held the town of Galway, though I guess because it was Irish-controlled and Irish-majority culture, the name would more accurately be pronounced as Galliaf. Like I said, I used to live in Ireland. Somehow my vassals managed to get troops to land in Ireland too, and the Irish seemed incapable of replacing their losses. We had 16,000 men total versus their 1,200, and it was just a matter of sieging now, and that just took time. The war, I thought, was going to be challenging because of the logistics of transporting my army across the sea, but it turned out that the biggest issue ended up being naval. The Irish heavy ships I mentioned were now sat in the Severn Sea, and my maritime presence was plummeting by 1.8 a month. Before the war ended, it sat at just 52, having started in the 80s. And unfortunately, the war didn't end because I managed to fully annex all my targets. It ended because England attacked me. The Ireland campaign was abandoned, and my army split up to siege the Pale. Because this vassal of England's was English culture ruling over Irish unaccepted pops, all of their forts on the island had 0 garrison, so I was able to quickly assault each one without issue. There were a few Pale armies to fight, and at one time England tried to land in Dublin with a small regular force, but these were beaten back, and I sieged all of the Pale before shipping my troops back to Wales. What had started as 9,000 Welshmen was now down to a meagre 3,500, but I could re-raise, including raising some levies from Ireland itself, so my forces stood at a grand total of 5,000. England were currently sieging my vassal of Wessex with 20,000. And just to point out, the land that I took included Clanricarde. I think this guy's called Thomond, and we took all of this as well. So, Connaught, I don't think we took anything from him. Tyrone, nothing from him, but we took basically a nice splitting land from both sides of Ireland. France was thankfully aiding me in this war again, as was Scotland, but both were doing about as well as they had in my independence war and failing to come to Wales to aid me in Wales. This was only going to get worse, so seeing us on 20% war score as the English still hadn't managed to siege anything, I pieced them out. We got 280 ducats from them, but our army was fully wiped. This war taught me that I was nowhere close to being able to take on England properly. They were fully more equipped than me in every single possible way, boasting an army 5 times the size of what I could muster. I would need to become heavily professional to beat them. In 1482, we finally annexed Wessex, and immediately all of the land was cored with decent control. Of course, their former capital was at 100 and would drop down to 50 as it was slightly inland, but the coastline was at 58, and due to my efforts increasing maritime presence, would increase to a 68 base under my control. This was definitely a good sign. This had brought my diplomatic capacity use down to 4.54 out of 5.1, but I was about to screw all that up, as the next step was to start the annexation of Bristol and release my Irish land into a vassal. Kildare was reborn, and it was given all of the land I owned on the island. This brought my diplo capacity back up to 5.29, and being less than 1 over was so much more manageable, as it was only affecting my loyalty of subjects by -4. In 1483, despite us having been at war several times, England actually offered me an alliance. Maybe he thought I was small and dumb enough to be peacefully vassalized, I don't know. But I took it, with a knife behind my back, of course, as I saw that if I could accumulate enough favours with England, I could ask them to improve cultural opinion, as the negative view the English had of the Welsh was causing me -5 satisfaction with all of my English pops. This alliance, however, did increase my use of diplo capacity significantly, and now my vassals had a -52 loyalty modifier. We managed, though, to keep them loyal nonetheless, and started currying favours with our old enemy. I also asked for market access preference in England, and all of my land immediately jumped into being a part of the London market, which had more pops, more demand, and far more wealth than the Dublin market. This immediately made my trade income jump from around 10 to 15, and it kept going up month on month. In 1487, I once again used my parliament to get a claim on Roscommon, who would call in Tyrone and Clan de Boyne, meaning we would control the majority of the island. Our levy had risen to 12,000, and not a drop in the bucket compared to England, but it was improving. Unfortunately, England also took this opportunity to attack Tyrone in the north, and we ended up splitting the sieges between us. Before we could run into any issues with vassalization bringing us to war, I peaced out, leaving Donegal, Derry, and Antrim for the English, and gave all the land to Kildare, who doubled in pop to 256. So this is what our island now looks like. This did increase the cost of keeping them a vassal, though, and Devon became disloyal, but it was only temporary as I researched the formalized relations advance, which increased my capacity by 1. Despite being in an alliance with me, England declared war upon my vassal of Worcestershire. I pronounced that horribly, it's actually Worcestershire, which obviously seemed like a bit of a bug. My vassal was not disloyal, nor were there any other signs that this should be doable. It just seems that the AI is not able to distinguish between vassal and overlord when it comes to declarations of war. Nonetheless, we raised the fort maintenance and hoped that France would come to our aid. This time we managed to raise 13,500 men as levies, and after asking a French miner for some money with the favours we had on France, I started building some regulars to go with them. 12 armoured horsemen were queued up, as I wanted something to go in, join the field fast, and maybe retreat before taking too many losses. We were outnumbered, we had to fight smart. The English started to siege the fort of Exeter, which is right here. The English started to siege the fort of Exeter with 10,000 regulars, so I marched my army behind them and sieged the town of Poole, which is right here. This would cut off supplies to their army and either force them to abandon their siege or starve. This kind of asymmetrical warfare was completely impossible in EU4, but now it's a valid strategy to success. Unfortunately, a second stack of 20,000 Englishmen scuppered that strategy by attacking me in Salisbury, and I had to retreat. The French were far too occupied sieging down the tiny enclave England still had inside of France, but even so we'd managed to accumulate a war score of 44. I pieced out Hainaut for war reps and max money, bringing my war score back down to 38, but then England landed an army on my capital from their boats, and I had to make a choice. Do I allow them to siege my capital, have 20,000 Englishmen just rampaging around inside Wales, hoping that eventually France can involve themselves in my defence, or do I try to make whatever peace I can right now? I decided to hold out, because I am stubborn. That's definitely a word that can be used to describe me in most aspects of my life. I'm very, very stubborn. Surely, this was not the only thing I could do. France would surely arrive soon. They were the military hegemon after all. But thankfully, England, before they finished the siege of my unfortified capital, and yes, a castle was then immediately set for construction, hopped back onto their boats and sailed away. The army sieging Exeter split up, and I managed to wipe the 1,000 that had remained before the larger part of the army could respond. So far, the losses were heavily in our favour. 58,000 lost on our side to 92,000 on theirs. England had also come up to 9.5 war exhaustion, lowering their morale by 20%. If we could keep growing this, England would give me 100% when they hit 18 war exhaustion. That was the new plan. France landed a small army in Exeter, but it was quickly wiped by the English, and looking around, I could count 45,000 Englishmen. If only France could arrive with their 60,000 something, we would win this with a breeze. I marched north, down to just 8.5k for myself, and sieged the unfortified provinces of Staffordshire, Derbyshire, and Nottinghamshire. Anything to boost the enemy war exhaustion. Another battle, though, and another hasty retreat before I lost my entire army. We were at 48 war score, and the enemy had lost nearly 100,000, but we were up to 63,000 losses ourselves, and the war exhaustion up to 10. Peace had to be signed. And this is where I think peace maybe needs to be looked at. Because I took another 4 provinces from England here. I still would have preferred to take Cheshire, as it's full of towns and it's on my border, but taking vassal land is far more expensive than taking land from England directly, so I snagged myself Staffordshire, Dorset, Wiltshire, and Hampshire. We went from 874,000 pops to 1.35 million. Though of course I released a couple of vassals, as I have zero control in Hampshire and Dorset, and I gave Staffordshire to my existing vassal of Worcestershire. With a vassal set, I was still at 1.1 million pops, though of course, of those only 387,000 were Welsh. My plan was to become, eventually, the cultural hegemon, and use the area-wide culture conversion to spread the culture of the valleys across England. Just as spreading it a province at a time, it's just not very good at all. It's pretty bad. And this is the new setup for my country. Here, obviously, is Devon, Hampshire, Worcestershire getting all of this land. All I needed now to become a kingdom was some prestige. 50 prestige, in fact. I had never invested into culture, as I didn't see prestige as that valuable of a resource compared to the insane amount that one ends up spending on it, but to get to 50 would be incredible, so now was the time. Now at peace, the forts were again mothballed, as was the army, which freed up some money to invest in my prestige. 6 whole ducats gained me 0.08 prestige per month. Yeah, it still doesn't feel very worth it. My daughter, who was my ruler's only child, was in need of a husband, and I was a little upset that my dynasty of Mather Fall was about to die out. But needs must, so I married her to a local noble who happened to die 4 days later. I would have done a proper royal marriage, but the heirs would end up being whatever culture the father was, and that was simply unacceptable. So I waited for a noble to come around, or for my wife to die so I could remarry. As I was scrolling through the list, I saw that I could marry her to a courtier in the Duchy of Luxembourg, Llewellyn Penelyn, a Welshman. Yeah, he was also my ruler's current nephew, but yeah, this is the 16th century, that's all allowed, right? Either way, my wife also died, and I married Prince Owen to a member of the Aragonese court who promptly gave me a son, also named Llewellyn. The succession is saved. I will also point out you can rename heirs when they're born. That's just, I called him Llewellyn because it's the most Welsh name I can think of. In 1500, our total economy sat at 188 tax base, of which my income was 122 and my expenses 84. The biggest expenses, of course, were our diplomatic spending at 24 ducats, buildings at 20, the cost of my court at 15, and temporarily our navy was at 13. It was currently docked in Penfro for repairs. I had just upgraded all of my barks to caravels. Another upgrade we did was regarding our army, as we started to professionalize. Handgunners were built but never saw combat before they were upgraded to arquebusiers. Similarly, hoofnesses became falconets, and heavy horsemen became lances. We were transitioning very nicely into the era of pike and shot. In 1514, the economic development continued, and my balance was now at 55 ducats from my 350 tax base. And there was surely nothing that could scupper any plans whatsoever. So yeah, anyway, England attacked again. This time, though, I had 6,600 professional troops, made up of 12 regiments of Lancer cavalry, 9 regiments of early arquebusiers, and 6 falconet artillery. Not exactly a huge army by English standards, but maybe when paired with my levies, which were now up to 27,000, we could do some damage to the English snacks if we caught them off guard. Their professional army, though, was still far beyond my ability to contain. Somehow, England had managed to take a bunch of land on the continent from France. I believe there was a Norman revolt that ended in white peace, and then England went and attacked it. That meant there was more war score to get from my ally France sieging down the English, but it also meant there was even less chance for France to come to Britain to aid us. Not that they'd shown any willingness to do so in any of the wars that we'd had so far, so I don't know why I keep mentioning it. One of my major problems was the fact that earlier on in the campaign, in order to pass a parliament request that I really needed, I ended up giving the nobles a really bad privilege, and now only my nobility could be generals. And I only had one available general at all. Originally, I had put him on my navy as I went to blockade the Chester provinces, though that navy was swiftly put down by the English and he was transferred into the 27,000 levy stack that I'd raised. It marched upon a 19,000 English army sieging Wrexham, which is like here-ish, and right here-ish. And we had our first real, proper victory. Every victory that we'd had over the English in the last 180 years of the campaign had come when I'd used my army to strike at small regiments cut off from anything that could be called an army. But here, on the 5th of January 1516, winning a real engagement against our foes, it felt so good. We lost 1,000 men, but the English lost 6,000. Morale in Wales tonight is very high. Feeling confident, I marched my 26,000 remaining men to fight another English levy stack. This time, they had 20,500, and I realized that confidence is a slow and insidious killer. We won, of course, but we lost 10,000 men in the winning, and even though we killed 11,000, England can stomach those kinds of losses, and we definitely cannot. Our 15,000 remaining men then fought in central Wales after it was caught by an English stack of 8,000 regulars, and I feared the worst. But as the casualty numbers came in, I was becoming more and more pleased by what I saw. Sure, these were troops that I could not easily replace, but they held their own against professional English soldiers, regular troops, and in the end, for 2,200 Welshmen, we killed 6,300 enemy regulars. This really goes to show the changes that have been made to the levy system, because in the past, in the previous version of the game that we had, having levies fight regulars was just a death sentence. 6,000 regulars could quite easily take on 30, 40,000 levies, and sure, they'd lose a few troops, they'd lose maybe half their number, but they'd definitely win, and it wouldn't really be close. Here, though, I just fought 8,000 regulars with 15,000 levies, and I won, and I killed more than I lost. And that's fantastic. That was really, really good to see. I did realize while fighting, though, why we were winning. Our armies were full of the latest units. 400-man-strong regiments of arquebusiers were facing off against 200-man-strong regiments of handgunners. The English had either not researched or simply not upgraded their armies yet. It was a grave mistake by them, though. Surely, it's kind of important to upgrade your units. Our victories, though, they were recognized across the continent. And the Pope himself deigned it right to call us king for what we had accomplished. The Principality of Wales was no more, and we were now the Kingdom of Wales. Our new kingdom was currently, though, not actually ruled by a king, nor by any monarch, in fact. It was currently the Queen Consort of Aragon, Catherine, ruling as regent for Owain's son, Llewellyn. He would be our first King of Wales. Yet again, I feel I'm obligated to point out that we had no flag or colour change with this upgrade to kingdom, and before anyone points out that flag changes for rank upgrades are not a thing, they absolutely are. Milan's flag changes between duchy and kingdom, and I would have hoped that here this would happen as well. Anyway, we were down to just 14,000 men total. I think around about 3,000 of that were regulars, the rest were levies. Our manpower was spent, levies obviously not reinforcing. I sieged down Windsor and Oxford castles, which are, I think this one specifically is Windsor Castle, and I believe this might be Oxford. And then I turned back to strike at the English armies attempting to siege my own fortress. My falconets showing the value as my siege speed far outstripped their own. Another battle, another victory, and looking at the war map mode, which gave you an accurate total for all enemy troops, which again I hope is able to be turned off when it comes to multiplayer, the English were down to just 7,827 men. My own army down to 13,152. We marched on London, finding a small 3,500 armies barring the way. Tossed aside, and the siege of London began. 264 days later, London falls. Now, I do have a small complaint here, because one of the artworks that London has is Llewellyn's coronet, and by the name Llewellyn in there, you can probably guess what that is. Llewellyn was the last, before our lovely Owain Glyndŵr, after all, the last native prince of Wales, and his coronet was stolen by the English and held in Westminster and then later the Tower of London, since he was defeated in 1284, before the game started. It would be nice to get some kind of event where I can reclaim the coronet as a symbol of Welsh princedom or whatever, even though I'm now a kingdom. It just would be nice. I think every art piece should have a "this was created by this country" flag on it, and if that flag managed to siege the land where that artwork is held, you absolutely should get an event where you can take it back. 100%, I really feel that way. Either way, with that and a few sieges of unfortified lands to the north, we sat at 60% war score, and I took 100. War reps, Warwickshire, Oxfordshire, Buckinghamshire, and Berkshire were all transferred to me, and of course, I released a vassal from the new land. 328,000 pops were claimed, ruled by the hero of our war, Llewellyn Penelyn, although I really need to find a way to revoke the privilege because I now no longer have anyone to lead my armies. And these are our borders. I released Oxford as the vassal, gave him multiple provinces. Either way, this is where I will leave this part of our tale. It is 1520, and Wales stretches from Ynys Môn to Windsor Castle to the very doorstep of London itself. There will be another video, for sure, of course, though I cannot say when that will be. Hopefully very soon. I am very much enjoying this campaign. The troubles and issues of the first 100 years are behind me. Cymru and Beef. See you later.